welcome to another episode of the Talking Horses podcast. By the people, for the people, the weekly podcast that brings you reviews and previews of all the big racing weekends, as well as attempting to look behind the curtain of the sport with a view to increasing understanding, accessibility, and of course, ultimately, enjoyment for all. Ben and Bruno back with you again, back in the usual video call format after last week's very rare, very exciting in-person affair. Bruno, it's Grand National Week, but firstly, should we reflect again on last weekend's episode? That was a lot of fun, wasn't it?
A lot of fun. Obviously, getting off-site at a very exciting location, and hopefully those who listen to the pod were able to follow the visual content that came with that on our Instagram, where we saw our horses, which is always a glorious thing to do, and got some great insights from Mike and Dylan. And we even backed a couple of winners.
We did, which we will come on to later on. Yeah, I mean, I think we timed that quite well because we were overdue some winners. So it was episode 10. It was a landmark episode. We had our first live episode in terms of you and I being together. We had our first external guests, and it wasn't quite our first winners, but it sort of felt like it was. So
it did. So whatever happens henceforth doesn't really matter. We've hit Everest already. It's fine.
It's all downhill from here.
Yeah.
So, yes, I would strongly encourage anybody that hasn't found the time to listen to the interview with Mike and Dylan of Rudy Racing last week to go back and do so. Even for us that know already, we're part of the syndicate and know what it's about, just hearing those guys talk about it and what their plans are for it and why they think it's a syndicate that people can be excited to be part of is great. So, and certainly helps to sort of, pull back some of the exterior about joining these sorts of things, particularly if you're somebody who's not from that background. And actually, Bruce, you mentioned last week, and I thought it might be worthwhile doing again, just the sort of what listeners can expect going forwards now with the sort of regular features and regular episodes like this one, but also what we're going to try and feed more into.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to probably fire up a couple of episode types, hopefully on a weekly basis is what we'd like to do. Obviously, continuing with what we've already been doing with, getting under the skin of the sport through deep ground. That's going to continue on a weekly basis, and we'll hope to have that aired every Thursday. But additionally to that, we're going to get more insights from the syndicate, the Rudy Racing Syndicate, the yard that our horses are currently attached to at Manor House, which is about to go into its next phase of development in terms of upscaling its operation. New trainer has just landed there. He's just had his first winner sent out from Manor House in the last week as well. So in Hugo Palmer, that is, by the way, and we hope to get some access to Hugo on a regular basis, even just for updates about our own horses, what they're being aimed at. So there's loads to go into, which hopefully will add a lot of colour to everything that happens behind the scenes of the sport that you just don't get to see unless you get involved with syndicates, which is very easy to do, which is what the guys are great at articulating. And if you do want to get involved, there are current opportunities to do so, and there will be plenty more in future with Dylan and Mike. So get in touch on that front.
Absolutely. Yeah, indeed. I know there are a couple of shows available as we speak on Wednesday, the 6th of April in a Philly that the guys have. But as you mentioned, the plan is to grow the number of horses under the Rudy Racing banner. So even if there isn't a share available immediately, you can certainly register interest. So yeah, fantastic. No, well, that would be brilliant. We're very fortunate to have the access that we do. Certainly felt very fortunate to be able to record from Manor House last week. And so we will try to leverage that good fortune to bring you, as you said, Brune, some fascinating content in the weeks and months ahead. So this week, we're going to crack straight on with Deep Ground before going on to, of course, look back at our winners from last weekend. Before having a look ahead to the racing that we've got coming up this week. Obviously, it is Grand National Week. And I mean, just briefly on that, I think Aintree's really become a quality meeting in recent years, hasn't it? And a real tonic for those post-Cheltenham Blues.
Yeah, it really is. And I guess the focus is on the big showpiece, 5:15 on Saturday night. But the 2 days before that are absolutely stunning in terms of the quality of racing that's on offer. And it kind of gets overlooked a little bit because of the showpiece. So we'll be getting stuck into a few of those later on in the episode. But yeah, very exciting, and it's been I'm ready now for that. I needed a bit of a post Cheltenham, decompression, and I'm back, ready for more.
it's a very good length of time.
Yeah, it is.
To do exactly what we described. I was thinking about this, the competition that you mentioned Saturday night. I was thinking the competition that the Grand National has, unusual to have racing going on, jumps racing going on that late into the evening. I thought, well, that's clashing with Anson Deck if they're still on TV. And I thought a nice name for a horse that has a future in staying chases and could potentially one day be in the Grand National. Saturday Night Takeaway.
Nice. Yeah, I was wincing. I was worried about what was going to come there, but that's okay. It's a good one.
Yeah.
Saturday Night Takeaway. It's 7 syllables, and we should probably jog and bust on that in future.
Let's do that.
But I think that's within the realms of what's allowed.
It's 7 syllables max, I think, that the BHA allow in a horse name.
There might be a letter limit as well. I'm not sure. I'll look into that and come back to you next week.
Yeah, there you go. Excellent. All right, we'll have to remember that. Anyway, we digress. So on to this week's Deep Ground. Now, we are going to, we thought long and hard about this, because we didn't want to necessarily rake up something that has been an overwhelmingly negative experience for the sport in the last few months. But I think given that this is the week of the year that horse racing is more in the public eye than any other stage of the year, which is a point that Lee Mottershead has made recently in the Racing Post, the appeal, Robbie Dunne's appeal against the 18-month ban that was handed down to him by the BHA the Independent Disciplinary Panel in December last year for the behaviour towards Bryony Frost. The appeal happened last week, and there's been a fair amount of fallout from sort of major kind of figures in the media, in the racing media, about the whole process. So we wanted to just dive into that a little bit more, given that we talk about the accessibility of racing. Well, that only matters if there's an appealing product to access, and the whole episode, this whole episode has been decidedly unappealing in terms of, firstly, the accusations of bullying made against Robbie Dunne, which were upheld in December, first and foremost, but also by the judicial process that's been undertaken since, and even the reaction more broadly of some of the others in the sport. So that's an extended intro, but Bruce, I'm going to hand over to you. We're going to start with just recapping on sort of everything that's happened to the point of the appeal last week.
Yeah, it's just a very brief history for the uninitiated on this topic. It's a saga that's now spanning, I think, nearly 2 years in terms of the first incidences of bullying from the jockey Robbie Dunne towards Bryony Frost, who's obviously a very, very well-known high-profile jockey who has won Grade 1s at the biggest festivals in National Hunt racing. So over the course of those 2 years, there have been consistent allegations by Bryony Frost about Robbie Dunne's bullying towards her. So there's been this kind of pattern that's been presented by Bryony Frost, and that led to a BHA facilitated hearing in November and December, which you referred to there, and that resulted in Robbie Dunne getting what was considered a hefty ban, but an unprecedented one, because there really hasn't been a case like this put forward in this sport. So 18 months was his ban then. As you've just mentioned, there's been an appeal in the last week, which has seen that ban reduced to 10 months. And I don't think we're here to necessarily talk about does the punishment fit the crime as such. It's more about the tone of the appeal hearing and whether that has revealed some real problems that still remain within racing. So I'm going to throw it back to you to just describe the tone in your own words, I guess, but paraphrasing the words of those leading voices in racing who were there to witness it live, and what kind of question marks that sprung up in your mind as to how that played out.
Yeah, indeed. I think the bottom line is that racing has this air of inaccessibility about it. And that spans all sorts of things. And that's the reason that we do Talking Horses, is because we want to shine a light on all of these different things. And for the most part, it's because we want to make what is a fantastic product, a fantastic sport, better accessible to everybody, from people with a decent interest, people with a fledgling interest, people with no interest, if they happen to find their way to this podcast. Now, part of the problem is that it is sort of shrouded in whether you're from a sort of if you're from a horse background, you're in the inner sanctum.
Yeah.
The inner sanctum also has an air of old boys club about it. And I think, when you strip it back further, it's middle-aged to older white blokes that are basically at the core of what governs the sport, what drives the direction of the sport, and what drives the investment in the sport. Pretty much everything that creates the product that we all see on racecourses and on televisions every day. And I think the world that we live in now and the world of horse racing are pretty starkly not quite opposed, but there's a pretty sort of stark separation there. We live in a world where sort of equality, whether that is gender or race or whatever it is at the sort of the best it's ever been, which is far from saying it's in a great place, but there is more conversation about it. There's more being done proactively in workplaces, for example, about it. These concerns from people that may have been dismissed in the past as just get on with it are now being taken more seriously. And that's very important progress. And I think it's very difficult to dispute that fact. Certainly I believe so. I think we both believe so, that this sort of progress in society can only be a good thing.
Which is why this case jars, doesn't it? Because 100%. It starts to be a bit of a throwback to, the world me and you maybe grew up in a little bit and experienced to an extent and benefited from to an extent, I guess, given our positions. So that's why it jars for me. But anyway, sorry, continue with the theme that you're on.
No, 100%. And you absolutely rightly pointed out at the top of this that we are not going to try and sort of get into the inner workings of whether the crime fits the punishment. And there's a huge amount of nuance here. But I think what we wanted to firstly do is shine some light, as you say, on the impression of others that were in the room on the day of the appeal had of the whole process, because that, I think, is fundamentally where there's something that's still sort of quite concerning going on. So Lydia Hislop and Lee Mottershead are both sort of very prominent journalists within the racing media. I'm sure the majority of you that have had any interest in the sport will have heard of them. If you're fairly new to it, then they're excellent commentators on the sport as a whole and the sport as a product, rather than just as a betting medium or the sort of the nuances of picking winners or whatever it might be. So basically, the appeal process last week appears to have been conducted by a panel of 3, as I believe it, white men, that, based on their behaviours and certainly based on the QC who was the chair of the panel, appeared to be leaning very much towards the case for the counsel for the defence from the word go. And that included sort of examples where the counsel for the defence was trying to reference particular evidence from the initial hearing. The QC stepped in and actually provided the evidence, and even sort of provided a new line of thinking, which was that the rule in the BHA rulebook J19, which Robbie Dunne was found to have been in breach of on 4 separate occasions, was actually a rule that this chair of the panel had fundamental problems with. I thought that was quite an unusual situation and a really important point, because if you've got someone who's supposed to be chairing an independent appeals panel that fundamentally has an issue with the laws within racing anyway, that were used as part of that, then that is something that you would think should be flagged up at the beginning of the process, and somebody independent should be in place, therefore, that doesn't have a bias.
And it seems to me that view was offered pretty early on in quite an unprompted way.
Yeah, right? 100%. It was very much unprompted, to the point where Lydia Hislop comments that actually the counsel for the defence wasn't necessarily going that way.
Yeah.
He was going to try and argue the case that it was the interpretation of that rule rather than the rule itself being the problem. So he was sort of providing a platform for the counsel for the defence, and then furthermore, there are multiple examples. I'm certainly not going to list them all, but the one that jumped out was the language that was used by the counsel for the defence, trying to sort of diminish. I think that's a theme all the way through, is diminishing language both from the counsel for the defence and the panel itself around the severity of what of what has happened. The counsel for the defence was trying to use a phrase like spat to sort of classify what had happened between Robbie Dunne and Bryony Frost. Lewis Weston, who was the BHA representative, objected to that, and then the chair of the panel then sort of felt that they could qualify the language and came up with quarrel, which in Lydia Hislop's eyes, and probably in most people's eyes, could be seen as relatively diminishing language when you compare that to the bullying that Robbie Dunne was banned for by the panel in December. And there's various other pieces of evidence throughout the day where it felt like the counsel for the defence and the panel that were conducting the appeal were kind of in cahoots. There was banter, there was joking, and Lydia Hislop makes the point that actually it felt like if it wasn't for the positioning of the desks, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the counsel for the defence and the appeal were one team. So it's interesting because Lydia Hislop is coming at this from a woman's perspective first and foremost, which I think is really important and something that you're getting very little of in the media. But she's also coming at it from an impartial journalist perspective. You see relatively little bias in there from her, and I think she's not trying to dispute whether a reduction from 18 to 10 months is fair or not. She is more trying to bring to the fore a process that, without her and Lee Mottershead, without that sort of coverage, could happen today, could happen tomorrow, could happen for years to come. And why that's important is if you've got, fathers, mothers, whatever it is, that are encouraging their children to go into racing, whether they're male or female, if they're encouraging them to go into a sport where these sorts of concerns are battered away as easily as it appears they were here, it's a really, it's worrying for the sport of racing. We talk about whether racing will still be here in sort of 20, 25 years time. There's lots of reasons for that, but I think something like that, if they don't act on the direction that racing is going compared with the rest of the world, eventually the public eye will fall on racing and it will be very hard to come back from.
I agree. It's a change or die state that I think the sport is in, and this is just one example where that's brought to light. Just to add to kind of the Lydia Hislop angle, yes, you could easily, because of her gender, say that her report is manipulated in some way to present a different view. She's very forensic about the specifics. So not only in the article, but also in replies to the article when it's posted on Twitter, she's very, very detailed about going back to people who are kind of taking it to the next step, kind of in support of the sexism argument, and she's very clear about, I've not gone the whole hog there. I'm really being very clear about what I'm taking issue with. So it's just worth mentioning that, in that it's not a kind of soapbox article that she's put forward there. It's very, very detailed, but you can't get away from that stench of old boys club that you mentioned at the very top, and that's a term that the sport as a whole has just struggled to kind of decouple itself from in the whole time that I've been part of it. You even see it, I think, a lot at race courses. Just a couple of one quote I wanted to pull out from Lydia Hislop's article, which was worth mentioning, again, around the sexism topic. Continuing to flirt with sexist tropes, Matthew, who was the counsel for the defence, added that Frost had not in reality been caused distress or fear by any of Dunne's behaviour, but was a woman obviously moved to emotion quite quickly. Yet it was Weston, who is the counsel for, the BHA representative, yet it was Weston's characterisation of these suggestions as outrageous that caused Bosworth, who was the chairman of the panel, to object to the language employed, having not once demurred about language that risked being interpreted as a dog whistle. There's so many problems with that, aren't there? I can't even begin to start with that.
Honestly, I'm interested.
Made me angry, to be honest, and I feel sort of a bit of a rage building up just reading that out again.
Right. Yeah, and I would imagine that if you and I have taken issue with this, that there are many, many, many people out there that feel the same way. I'm sure there are people that feel the opposite too, but that jumped out at me as well. And my first thought went to these sort of these courtroom dramas, that you see where it is just a incredible miscarriage of justice
Total
that appears
injustice,
to be playing out in front of your very eyes, with very little that anybody can do about it unless they are willing to go well above and beyond. You could start to bring in examples of, making a murderer, for example, obviously completely different, albeit that there was reference to comparisons from Boswood between the punishment for Dunne against the rules being equivalent to punishment for manslaughter or murder.
Wow.
Which is a further example of some pretty hard to balance rationale from there. But anyway, I think you can see where we're going with this. So yeah, I was very taken with that language. She finishes with, "I found many elements of tone and conduct in the appeal hearing insensitive, inappropriate, and out of date. I hope never again to see anything remotely like it in the 21st century."
But what confidence do we have that we won't?
Well,
honestly, I have very little. And we must stress, actually, it's easy to kind of point figures at the governing bodies of racing. This is an independent panel, separate from the BHA, separate from the Jockey Club, for example, that come in with this view. So it should be made clear that this is not something we can brush, that we can sort of tar the BHA with, for example, and say, oh, it's rotten, it needs revamping. It's much more complex than that. But it's just this language that keeps cropping up in this sport more than any other that I can think of.
It's a great question, and I think certainly as long as you have journalists like Lydia Hislop and Lee Mottershead, and there are absolutely others too, that are outspoken about this. As long as you have good journalists that are prepared to put their neck on the line for progress, then the sport has a chance.
Yeah, thank goodness for them. Yeah,
absolutely. And you read this stuff, and it will be very easy. It's very easy. And this is another part of the problem through history, to look at stuff like this and go, is there anything I can do? Not really. And just get on with your job, which is we see far too much of that. So yeah, where that leaves us in conclusion, I don't know. But I think it was just something that you and I decided that we felt strongly enough to bring back up in light of what's happened last week, and in light of it being Grand National Week, where no doubt people are going to be looking at the Racing Post more than ever. I'm sure ITV Racing will be interesting to see whether ITV Racing do provide any coverage of this over the weekend. That will be, that they are the sort of, we talk about journalists, progressive journalists. They have done wonderful things for the sport in the last few years, making it more accessible. And they've provided a great platform for Bryony, as a number of media outlets have. But be interesting to see whether there's any coverage that they provide to this on the biggest stage.
I'm not sure how many rides Bryony has got herself this coming week. I imagine she will have something in the National, given there's 40 runners. And Paul Nicholls obviously got a bigger team for this than he did for Cheltenham. But I can't help feeling in all of this that she is the big loser in this whole debacle. And the stat that kind of backs this up, and I must make it clear again that this stat is not directly correlative of the situation, but I saw a great table that somebody had put together on the number of rides that Bryony has had in the period January to March 2022 versus the same period a year ago. She's had a whole host more runners last year than she did this year. In fact, let me bring the official number up. 76 rides in January to March 2022 versus 117 in the same period last year. Trainers she's ridden for, just 7 in the period for 2022 versus 16 in the period for 2021. Now, I can't help but think that this case has to play a part in that. There will be other factors, of course there will be. There will be the fact that she's riding out a bit for Willie Mullins in Ireland. I don't know if that's suggestive of a move across there potentially, but she's losing out here, I think, and I think this must have something to do with it. Which is interesting, given one of the sort of broad stroke reasons for the ban being reduced by the appeals panel was that at this they decided that an 18-month tariff was overly severe given the number of rides Mr. Dunne will have lost to date and will lose in the future at this late stage in his career. Those last 6 words, nothing to do with the matter. What stage of his career is that? Why is that a factor at all? So I can't see that logic.
And also, if they are concerned about the impact on the number of rides that he is receiving as a result of this, then what you've just described about the correlation between and probably causal link between this whole process and the number of rides that Bryony has potentially lost compared to last year, that appears to not be taken into consideration.
No, exactly. So problems abound in this topic, but it's important to cover it, and that's why we're here doing this.
That's why we're here,
podcast, kind of, to add more confusion into the mix. But I just think it needs to be broken down a little bit for the audience we're trying to help understand. Not only the great things about the sport, but the problems it's still got, and hopefully add some sort of element of progress into the whole conversation.
It's the complete absence of support for the person who is the victim here that ultimately is the thing that really grates with me. She was somebody that was on the front pages, of newspapers when she was winning Grade 1s at Cheltenham on Frost-Dunne, and she was the darling of the sport. ITV couldn't cover her enough. I can't help but think that's part of the problem, because I think there is also some resentment towards her in the weighing room that we're not really hearing about. But I can only think it's something like that is driving some of the behaviour from Dunne, driving the fact that he feels that he could get away with it, and maybe driving the lack of support for Bryony specifically that we've heard from the weighing room. Although I understand that Robbie Dunne is also in the weighing room, and you might want as another jockey to stay out of it a little bit. But it is, the sport will milk Bryony for all she's worth when she's at the top, and when she's going through something like this, the sport owes her the same level of support, and I don't feel that she's had that.
I think she's out in the cold at the moment, for sure.
Yeah, indeed. And that's the issue that I think you and I both have. It's not the nuance of what happened, etc. That's not for us to comment on. We wouldn't have all the details, etc. But so there we go. Hopefully, sort of time well spent, just to sort of shed a bit more light on that. Right, let's move on to more upbeat topics, which is, we'll start with a review of last weekend's racing.
Oh my word.
Yeah, so we're back, and obviously you now famously said in episode 10 we are not a tipping podcast. Repeat, not a tipping podcast. And then we fired in 2 winners.
So we did. We're still not a tipping podcast. I'll reiterate that. Exactly. But you're now back in the black, aren't you, on the tipping challenge after a 13-2 or 7-1 winner?
Yeah, I was actually a bit disappointed to see that she'd shortened into to co-favourite, because I think she was drifting out to sort of 8-1 or so. But look, I'm not complaining. Yeah, but £1.50 profit to a £1 level stake now. Perfect. So yes, I was. I'll start with my wings.
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, there's not a huge amount to say other than Christian Williams staying handicap chases. The man is quickly proving himself to be a bit of a maestro. He's only 39. And it was really interesting. He was saying when he left, when he stopped riding, he realised, or towards the end of his riding career, he realised how little he'd picked up by way of advice and tips on training. And so he sort of, made a point of trying to gather that stuff relatively late in his career. So if you think about it, he's probably only had training in his mind for less than 10 years. Right. And you think a lot of these trainers, the sort of the Toby Laws and the Harry Derham, who's going out on his own, currently Paul Nicholls' assistant trainer, but going out on his own next year, who's mid to late 20s. These are young guys who've basically been, Dan Skelton, who have been sort of groomed as trainers from a young age, no pun intended. So there's that interests me. The fact that he is based in this little farm in coastal Wales. He trains his horses on the beach, which is a big part of why the stamina is there in droves. And the fact that he sort of buys these horses fairly cheaply. Both Win My Wings and Kitty's Light were bought for, I think, less than the sort of cost of the horses in the Rudy Racing Syndicate, and they are meant to be affordable. So, sort of, I think Kitty's Light was even, who was second in the race, was £5,000, something like that when he purchased them. And the pedigree was more of a flat pedigree, and yet he's turned Kitty's Light into probably a future Grand National contender. So there's a whole load there about Christian Williams that I find fascinating. The race itself, we'll come on to Rob James's £7 claim, because it was referred to as by Mick Fitzgerald as stealing, given his proficiency of riding point-to-point winners in Ireland. But I think I watched this back, and I didn't watch it live, but I watched it back on the train home from having a few beers last Saturday afternoon. I didn't really feel on the second circuit a moment's worry. She just slowly moved through into a really handy position. There's a slight fear she got there too early, but I mean,
so much in the tank. Yeah, exactly. I wonder what they're going to do next with her, because there was so much left in the tank.
Yeah, it really was.
Obviously, the Rob James thing will have had some impact, but still, that was mightily impressive, and probably one a lot easier than either you or I thought she would.
Oh, 100%. I was very worried about Kitty's Light. I thought there was a lot of shrewd judges that were fancying him. But yeah, and it just shows that, you can. Another thing he said was patience. She's 9 and she's only been stepped up to marathon trips this year. And I think they always kind of thought that maybe that's what they would do, but they didn't want to do it too early. Interesting that with Kitty's Light, they've taken the other approach, because he was running over 3, was running in Badger Beers chases at the age of 4. So kind of a different approach with him. But anyway, it's just that the whole story is interesting. But yeah, it's very nice when you're on a horse that travels and jumps that well, and from a long way out that, barring any mishaps, that you're on a winner. So yeah, I was very happy with that. Well done to all involved. That was brilliant.
Indeed.
And do your job for Michael Scudamore. That was it was sort of not far off equally impressive.
Yeah, exactly. And it was that similar feeling of, barring any disasters in that second circuit, he was the winner a long way out. I thought the race prior that he ran in at Newcastle, he won well, he won gamely, he didn't jump that well. Whereas here, clearly that had been brushed up a little bit, and that made all the difference and made it a much more comfortable experience. Had £5 in hand on Manila Drama, who came second, who I think was vying for favouritism with him. Clearly there was a lot of support from him in the market, because when I backed him on Talking Horses a week ago, he was something like 5-2, and he went off at 11-8. So my level stake has not improved that dramatically, but still quite happy with it. But yeah, really solid, formidable performance.
A great pick, and the starting price was certainly not reflective, as you say, of the competitiveness of the race when you put him up as your selection. So well done. And SPs don't always, I mean, it can happen, can't it? But maybe we should I don't mind, I'm fine, and do it based on the price we put them up at. Maybe we could do that for next week. We could have a look at our £1 level stake based on the price we put them up at.
Well, certainly for the national, things are going to move a lot between now and Saturday night. So maybe I'll hold you to that. Yeah,
that'd be interesting to see. Right, so let's move on to the weekend preview. Now we're calling it that, but it's much more than that. It is a preview of 3 fantastic days. That's why we're doing this a day early. So this will be available sort of Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening this week, to get in there for the Thursday, Friday of Aintree. So we're going to cover 2 races each, and then we're going to have a look at the Grand National. I'm going to provide you 2 selections this week, one for the Grand National each, and then one from one of the other races at Aintree. Bruno, let's start on the Thursday, and you were going to have a look at the Aintree Bowl, or you have had a look at the Aintree Bowl.
I have, which is at 2:55 on Thursday. It's a Grade 1 over 3 miles. Really interesting renewal of this, in that you've got kind of an up-and-coming staying chasing set, the likes of Protectorat, Conflated, Eldorado Allen, Rob Pagaille, versus some really established names in Clandezobo, Kemboy, who's won this before as well, Bristol de Mai, who's won plenty of Grade 1s over this kind of trip. I'd be siding with the youngsters, though, here. I just think there's a clear pattern in those last 3 names that I mentioned of regression, I guess. As much as they've provided some great performances and provided me with some great winning moments as well over the years, I would be siding with the up-and-coming lot, namely Protectorat. I thought he ran an absolute belter in the Gold Cup to finish third there. He's got brilliant course form as well. He won really well, didn't he, back in the early December meeting?
Yes.
Smashing Native River by 25 lengths in some atrocious conditions, I seem to remember. But he's pretty ground versatile, so no concerns with the good or at worst good to soft ground we're going to get in these next 3 days. Conflated is obviously interesting at a similar price. He was in the process of probably finishing a good runner-up to Allaho at Cheltenham, and prior to that, he obviously won the Irish Gold Cup in pretty taking fashion. The one I do like at a bit of a price is Eldorado Allen. He actually tried to go with Allaho, and you made this point on our pre-chat last night. He tried to go with him from the start in the Ryanair, and he still stayed on well to finish a pretty good third. He actually was in second and then just got nabbed for second by Janadil on the run-in. And prior to that, obviously, at his first attempt at 3 miles, he won the Denman Chase really well at Newbury, beating Royal Pagaille on what was pretty good ground then. So he's interesting. Probably the one I'm going to come down on is Protectorat, although he's just getting to a little bit of a skinny price. But it's a really interesting one. It might just provide a bit of a guide as to how staying chases are going to get dominated, certainly in the UK in the next year or so. But I'm looking forward to seeing Protectorat hopefully back up what was a good run at Cheltenham. That would be the only concern, is the proximity to what is obviously a really, really stern test in the Gold Cup.
But that's the case for all of them that you've mentioned, I guess. So that you can
yeah. There's none that have really been held back. Well, apart from in the older set where you've got Clandis Obo, who's been aimed at this specifically, but I can't have him based on what I've seen from him this season, to be honest. Any thoughts from you on that one?
Yeah, Eldorado Allen for me, for the reasons that you mentioned. Yeah, he's very interesting. I love Protectorat as a horse. I think at the price is Eldorado Allen. Otherwise, I would see the conflated Eldorado Allen and Protectorat as all having excellent chances, and I would expect the winner to come from one of those three. Unless
maybe there's a tri-cast in there.
Maybe there is. Not the way I like to bet, because those things never come off. But why the hell not? A little, for a bit of interest. Yes, and I was just going to say, unless you see Clandis Obo have one of his days, which is perfectly possible. But
might happen, yeah.
Right, okay, I'll go next. So I'm going to have a look at the Aintree Hurdle, the race after the bowl, the 3:30 on Thursday. I like Brewing Up a Storm here. I think this is a race where you can apply the whether they ran at Cheltenham angle. So Epatante, Zanahiyr and Glory and Fortune all ran in the Champion Hurdle. All ran good races, all were involved in the finish. So there's question marks over how fresh they'll be coming into this. It's an intermediate trip, so Epatante, who's currently favourite with Zanahiyr, is a speed horse. It's not going to be as soft as it might have looked like it would be at one stage earlier this week, which will be in her favour. But I'm prepared to look past a 2-1 shot when they're stepping up in trip. Zanahiyr is the one that everybody has been talking about relishing a step up. But he's also 2-1, and Gordon Elliott has had one winner in the last 2 weeks. Yeah. So he is as cold as ice.
Yeah.
And Abracadabra's won this last year. Can I see Zanahiyr winning again? Yeah, of course I can. But just that stable form would be enough to put me off at 2-1. Otherwise, he would be definitely of interest. And then Glory and Fortune, you would have a chance to place. I think you can get 3 places in this, even though it's only 7 runners. So I wouldn't put anybody off that, because he always runs his race. But, and then McFabulous Guide of Dreams, I really can't see that. Mon Morale, 5-year-old, I probably can't see that either, given that his form this year. Brewing Up a Storm has been laid out for this, I think. He's had a 39-day break when race day comes. He won super impressively over course and distance in November. And at that moment, I thought, right, Ollie Murphy's going to line him up for this. He's the best horse that they have in the yard. He was beaten ahead by Botox Haas at Fontwell last time, but that's a weird track. You can draw a line to that. Horses either love it or they don't. And it was actually a pretty decent run to finish a close second. I think this is much more his bag. So Brewing Up a Storm for me in the Aintree Hurdle. Any thoughts from you?
Yeah, with you on the selection. I am interested in how Mon Morale is getting on, because he was obviously electric at this meeting last year, beating Adagio, I think, quite comprehensively in a juvenile hurdle. So he's found it tough stepping up into open company this season, but I still think that's a horse that's worth keeping an eye on. So let's see how he's getting on.
Yeah, definitely. I think whatever happens, yeah, he's a horse for the future. And 440 is the next one we're going to look at, the Red Rum handicap chase. I love this. It's the grand annual of Aintree. I was very keen on Editor de Gite before the 2-day declarations. Bizarrely, he's going for the 2.5 mile Grade 1, which is, I think, the first time he's ever stepped up in trip. I would have thought he had an excellent chance in this race, having won it last year. But obviously Gary Moore and connections had other ideas. So back to square one, and I was looking through it. I love 2 mile handicap chases at this sort of level. And there's obviously plenty of horses that you could make cases for, but I wasn't particularly taken with the credentials of anything more than the one I'd come down on, which was a 16-1 shot.
Ooh, hello.
And the horse that I like is Sky Pirate.
Oh, okay.
Now, I'm not going to spend all day going on about the case for the Pirates, but basically, if you look at the way he's run all of this season, he is not a Grade 1 horse. And when he won the Grand Annual, went up to a rating of 159. And then all through this season, he's been running either in handicaps carrying top weight, in which he's finished 2nd, 4th, and 2nd, none of which has he been any further than 7 lengths behind the winner. Or he's been running in graded races, including a 13-length 3rd to Shishkin and a 12-length 4th to Funambule Sivler more recently in Newbury in February. Now, I think that form is to be taken very seriously. And we talked about this. You asked me, I think, in a previous episode, what's your feeling about backing horses coming back into handicaps and carrying top weight? And my answer was that I'm very happy doing it because they've proven themselves at a higher level. So coming back and carrying a big weight, I'm less worried about. Whereas if they're a progressive horse that hasn't, that is carrying a big weight and hasn't quite, gone up, shown anything beyond that level yet, then I have more of a question mark.
Clearly, there's some confidence, isn't there, from the yard to do that, to make that move rather than stay off levels with, the big boys and girls at the very top.
Absolutely. I think that people thought that he lost his chance in the Grand Annual last year by winning at Warwick, and ended up running off. I think it was 153, carrying, if it wasn't top weight, it was close to. And he still won. So he's back to that mark again now. And I just wonder whether the yard might have had this in mind. And if you look at the way he's been campaigned this year to maybe just slowly try and bring his handicap mark down, the yard's in sparkling form. So, yeah, I really like Sky Pirate. I'm not normally an each way better these days, but I think you can get 6 places. You can get 14-1, 6 places. So, yeah, he's of serious interest to me.
Nice. I am a massive Time White fan here. I think his price is wrong. Basically, I think that's one of your Ricks has come to light here. So I'm going to be on him, particularly if there are 6 places.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think definitely got a nice each way shape to it. Right, and then you've got a word for what's a fascinating race on the Friday, the Mildmay Novices Chase. Just 4 runners, but it could be one of the more competitive races of the week.
Definitely low on runners, but extremely high in quality. And you've got kind of a couple of rematches rolled into one here, where Braban's Game, who belatedly skipped Cheltenham 20 minutes before the not the Turners, the other one, the Brand Advisory Novice Chase. He reopposes Ahoy Senor, who he beat at Kempton on Boxing Day. And he reopposes L'Empress, who obviously impressed, winning the that same aforementioned race at Cheltenham in the absolute biblical conditions that we got on the Wednesday. And Fury Road is also in this. This is a horse I like as well, but the yard form is definitely a worry. Now, look, clearly you can make a compelling case for all of those, but I'm going to side with Braban's Game. He should be very, very fresh, obviously, given that late withdrawal from Cheltenham. He's had a perfect season so far, and there's still critics kind of knocking about around Braban's Game. I just don't see it. He has been foot perfect. His jumping is immaculate. The track here should really suit. And I think the way the race is going to play out should suit as well, because I think both, again, L'Empress and Ahoy Senor are going to be going at it early on. So I expect that to play into his hands, and he should, pick them off as they turn in and that should be a straightforward win. I've actually backed him in a double with Fakir Doudari, who runs in the race after this, just to get a bit more value into the overall price. And I think those two are nailed on for me.
That's a beauty of a double. I'm going to have that as well. So, yeah, lovely. Right, should we do our, before we get onto the Grand National, should we do our selections from the non-Grand National races at Aintree?
Let's do it. Shall I give you mine?
Please do.
I would give you that double, but I've offered something else here at a bit more of a value price, which is coming in the Sefton Novices Hurdle, which is a 3-mile hurdle, 4:40 on Friday, and the horse I am tipping is Gelino Bello. Ooh. I'm tipping him 0.5 points each way, just for absolute clarity. There are 4 places here on offer. He's around 8-1 at the moment, and I like him for a number of reasons. Mainly because he has run really, really well in behind Blazing Carl, who for a long time was the anti-post favourite for the Albert Bartlett at Cheltenham. He's got a bit of Aintree form in the book as well from October of 2021, beating Rioja really well. That horse has since won twice. I thought he also ran well in the Lanzarote at Kempton, which is over 2.5 miles, carrying quite a big weight and just getting done for pace. I thought he was pretty prominent and then just got picked off, but still stayed on to finish 4th. And he's in pretty fine fettle too. He won about a month ago at Newbury, winning very, very easily there, albeit at a very short price. But so I think he is in exactly the right spot to run a good race here.
Fab. Yep, brilliant. That's a good one. And for me, it's the one that got away at Cheltenham. I noticed this morning that Lydia Dunne is entered in the first race on Friday, 2.5 mile handicap hurdle. I've just had a quick look at the betting. He's currently 72, but I think he's not going to get any shorter than that. Put it that way. The bookies have priced him up based on the price that he went off at in the Martin Pipe. Right. There are 22s, a full field of 22 in this, so I would be surprised if he gets any shorter. I'd quite happily be on him at 72 SP come the day. He was obviously primed to run a massive race. He's got Harry on board this time, which he wouldn't have had in the Martin Pipe, which I think can only be a positive. So I really like Lydia Dunne. I think it would be remiss of me to jump off him, having been firmly on him at Cheltenham. And so the 145 on Friday, Lydia Dunne, the 2.5 mile handicap hurdle, and obviously Dan is chasing Dan Skelton is chasing the trainer's title. It's only £42,000 to the winner at this race, so it's not like it's going to have the impact that a Protector at winning the bowl would have, for example, to sort of create inroads on Paul Nicholls' lead, but you'd certainly take it. And I like his chances. So that's my selection for the non-Grand National races. So let's have a look at the big one. Let's do it relatively quickly because we haven't got too much time left. But Bruno, tell us your fancy, or indeed any angles you want to share on the Grand National, and then your fancy.
I think I'm just going to be pretty brief here because I've looked at this a lot. I will have at least 5 or 6 goes at this, but to offer one solid angle at still, I think, a reasonable price, it's Fiddler on the Roof for me. I've come down on him. I just think he's such a reliable sort. We're yet to find out if he's going to get this extended trip. I guess that is an obvious concern. But at Newbury in the Ladbrokes Trophy back in November, he was more than getting a 3 mile plus trip, wasn't he? And actually, he needed a bit further to probably win that. He was coming to win and just ran out of room, basically. He's had a fantastic season, I think. He won a very competitive race at Carlisle at the start of the season, beating the likes of Espada Romay. And he had Ahoy Senor beaten in that race as well before he unseated. So I just think that's a very good horse for a yard. That is banging form, which is not something we've been able to say too much about Colin Tizard. He's operating at a strike rate of 26%. The jockey that is named, Brendan Powell, is also operating at 25%. So around 14, 16 to 1, I think Fiddler on the Roof is going to give you, at the very least, a very good run for your money for a long way. So it remains to be seen whether he'll get the full, 34 furlongs?
That's right. It's 4 miles, something 2 furlongs, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the only unknown, but I can't see anything in his pedigree that suggests he won't go that trip. So I really like him.
Great stuff. Well, I've just backed him based on that case.
Yes.
Thanks very much.
Nice.
Yes.
That'll look good on the for the clips we do after on the
Absolutely.
Instagram.
Yeah, there you go. So no, I couldn't be anywhere else after that compelling case. I mean, he was on my shortlist already for sure. But no,
Yeah.
I totally agree with everything you said. It was a really interesting piece from Chris Cook in the Racing Post this week about the fact that, how surprising it is that the Tizzards have not had not just more success in this race, but more runners in this race.
Right. Yeah.
Given that they are. Proficient in training staying chasers. This year they've got Fiddler on the Roof. Do they also have another? Lost in Translation
Translation not in this. Yeah,
is going to get a run, and I think with Harry Cobden on board, so they've got 2 in it this year. I mean, yeah, Lost in Translation with 100 to 1. It takes the eye, but it takes a little bit of faith as well. The one I like then is Enjoy Dallin.
Yes.
We actually talked about him when we did our pod a few weeks back, and we had a couple of long range shouts, and he was mine. And I think then the following week's episode we had a quick break mid episode, and whilst you were off changing your headphones, I checked the Racing Post homepage, and it turned out that JP McManus had bought him. So I jumped on immediately, because if he's good enough for JP McManus, he's certainly good enough for me. He is an 8-year-old. There's a trend. I think it's 8, 9, 10-year-olds generally tend to win this. So he's certainly coming into his prime. And he's just got some very good back form, namely 3rd in the Irish National last year after being very well supported. I think he was 8 to 1 that day, just finishing 4 lengths behind Free Wheeling Dylan. I think Run Wild Fred was 2nd, if I remember right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that form is looking pretty good since. And then obviously had this race in mind, or one of the nationals anyway, in mind for the whole of this season, as being campaigned as such. Staying on 3rd in the Paddy Power at Leopardstown at Christmas. That form looks very good. Schoolboy Hours was travelling beautifully in the Kinmure before he made a mistake. He went off favourite for that race too. That form, I think, is pretty good. And then he had a prep run over hurdles at the Dublin Racing Festival, and actually finished a very respectable 5th out of a field of 24 over a trip that was definitely just not long enough for him. So yeah, for Kieran Murphy, there's a nice story there. A relatively small trainer that has actually he contacted JP, I think, to say that the horse was available. I like that.
Love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I've got a good one here, JP. What do you think? And JP said yes. So Enjoy Dallin for.
Is this his first outing in the green and gold?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they're going to have him primed, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, this is why he was bought. So, but look, if it doesn't work out this year, he's only 8, as I say. There's some. Look, it's always a head scratcher, but I've been with him for the last few weeks, so I'm not going to desert him now. But yeah, I'm with you. I'll probably have at least 2, and there might be a couple more that jump out. I think Gordon Elliott's contenders, probably Ascaria 10 more than Delta Work actually, but again, that stable form worries me a little bit. But,
yeah, me too. I will still back Barclay, who was my long range shout from when we talked about this before, but yeah, that is a concern.
Well, wherever you're watching it at 5:15 on Saturday night, I hope that you have a nice Saturday night takeaway of your own, and enjoy the race. It's a wonderful spectacle. Hopefully, all the horses get round safely. That is the most important thing. And given the changes in safety that have been made over the years, there's a very good chance that will happen. Right, on to the final stages. We've got 3 fences ahead of us. We're on to 3 out. We're going to tackle 3 interesting topics in no more than 2 minutes each. We're going to start with watering, race courses, and ground classification. So this is just an interesting topic that comes up time and time again. It was a big talking point at Cheltenham because they watered on the Tuesday night thinking that they were only going to get a small amount of rain on the Wednesday morning. Then they got Noah's Ark levels and it was heavy by the end of the day. Any negativity towards the clerk of the course, and Paul Nichols, I'm looking at you as well, is absolutely ridiculous because you're asking people to predict the future. They waited till the night before. I think they felt they had no choice. I mean, admittedly, if they left it and knowing there was some rain coming, then you might have thought that was probably safe. But look, it was his first Cheltenham as clerk of the course. It's a bloody difficult job, so I thought that was wide of the mark. But I wanted to also look at ground classification. We talk a lot about this, and you hear a lot of mention about horses being pulled out on good ground.
Mm-hmm.
going to sort of ground classification, good ground is measured using a going stick. That's homogeneous across race courses, but the readings they give are not classified homogenously. So a reading can be classed as soft at one race course and good to soft, or even heavy at another. Now, there may be some nuance as to why that is, but it's very difficult to know exactly what by looking at the sort of the thing that is homogeneous, whether the ground is going to be one thing or another if you're looking at different race courses. But if ground is classed as good and yet horses are being pulled out, then is that an appropriate classification?
Yeah, probably not.
Ground.
Good sounds good, right? Doesn't sound dangerous.
Should be perfect.
Yeah, it should be spot on, and your horses will run faster and use their, amazing athletic prowess to its full potential. But I feel like it's now becoming firm, basically. Another word for that. So, yeah, problematic. The whole watering thing, I think it's just a non-discussion. Taking that example from the Wednesday of Cheltenham, I think it was going to be heavy ground, whatever happened, given the amount of rain we got. Yeah, so no blame apportioned to anybody for decisions they made. And I didn't realise about the non-homogeneous approach to classifying ground. I thought that would be standardised, right? But no, this is racing, so there are going to be nuances. And to be fair, there are probably going to be nuances as to why that happens. But that feels like something to fix, or maybe it's more about going stick readings being something that the racing audience needs to be educated on. Because from what I understand, that is a more reliable kind of reading to go by rather than a description.
Yeah, it certainly gives you an idea of because you have, even within a particular classification, even within good to soft, you have the softer end of that, you have the better end of that.
Right.
So yeah, there's a website called Turf Tracks, which I think is the company that actually sort of provides the readings.
Okay.
So I have a look at that. That's quite interesting if you wanted to get a bit more of a view on that. On to conditional jockey claims. So a conditional jockey can claim a weight allowance of £7 until they have 20 wins. This is in the UK anyway. £5 until 40 wins and £3 until 75 wins. Conditional jockeys with fewer than 5 wins can also claim an extra £3 when riding for their own stables. So that amounts to £10 in total. Now, it was very interesting. We touched on it already. Rob James's £7 in the Scottish Grand National was classed by Mick Fitzgerald as stealing. Now, it wasn't necessarily said in a negative context, but it does bring to the fore the fact that a point-to-point rider in Ireland, a prolific point-to-point rider in Ireland, who has had 264 point-to-point winners, is able to claim £7 which is the same as, amongst others, Mark McDonough, who has had, I think it's something like sort of 20, 25 winners over the last 5 years, a young lad working his way up. They are allowed to claim the same. That doesn't stack up for me.
Doesn't stack up for me either. No, I didn't realise that, and clearly we should have piled in on With My Wings even more last weekend, given that intel that you've just shared. That's mad, isn't it? And I can't see a reason why you couldn't make some kind of different, ruling up for that exact example, because it must happen a lot, particularly in Ireland, where point-to-pointing is such a, it's got such a developed setup, and it's happening all the time, and naturally there's going to be very, very experienced jockeys coming out of there, but then stepping into professional racing as amateurs essentially, which makes no sense.
Yeah, absolutely right. I totally agree. And certainly when you look at the likes of Derek O'Connor, Jamie Codd, Barry O'Neill, etc., they're all amateurs. They all ride point to points all the time and have plenty of winners. They do okay when they're riding without a claim against the others, Patrick Mullins. So yeah, that seems wrong. And then on to the final one, which is a bit of a jargon bust, and one that actually we were chatting about this week that we didn't actually know the answer to. We were discussing what is the difference between a filly and a mare. We're going to expand that and also look at the difference between colt and gelding, but I'll hand over to you.
Should we start with the girls?
Let's start with the girls.
Because that's more straightforward. So a filly is a female racehorse aged 4 years or younger. So currently within Rudy Racing, there are 3 fillies.
There are, correct.
All aged 2 actually at the moment, yet to race, including Glorious Angel, who we both have an interest in. But she will become a mare when she reaches the age of 5. So that obviously means that they will go for different races. and will not be able to qualify for fillies only contests, which you mainly get on the flat, and then mares races you see more in national hunt racing. So that's quite a straightforward definition of those two. When it comes to the boys, it gets a bit more complicated, but we'll try and make it as simple as possible. A colt is a male racehorse aged 4 years or younger that hasn't been gelded, or in kind of more common terminology, castrated. So we had a colt last year called Lordman, and this year we have a gelding called Lordman because he has had the operation that should hopefully help to focus his mind and make the most of his awesome potential. And he is pretty awesome when you see him in the flesh. So yeah, that's the kind of difference there. But then there's a whole piece around colts who get to a certain age, i.e. over 4 years, who are still entire, i.e. they still have all of their bits and bobs, and might be primed for breeding, and they are therefore called stallions. And you don't often get examples, right, where you see stallions at an older age still racing, because it's a bit of a risk from an investment point of view. But there have been the odd example, but there's not yet a term that kind of defines on a race card a gelding, not a gelding, a colt who's become a stallion who is still racing.
Yeah,
there's
indeed.
No S by their name, for example.
If that has ever happened, and that was something that you and I weren't really sure of, but it is. If it has, it is supremely rare, because the risk. I think you underplay it, the level of risk. The risk is massive given the amount of money involved in breeding. Yeah. They will not run if they have gone to stud. So generally speaking, you wouldn't run a colt past the age of 4, because if they haven't achieved what they needed to have stallion value, then they'll be gelded, because they ain't going to be a stallion. So why not geld them? Focus their mind. If they have achieved it by 4, then you're not going to take the risk. So anyway, hopefully that's of some interest. And if those of you out there that were wondering the difference between mare and filly, colt and gelding, well, now you know. And that's it for this episode of Talking Horses podcast. Bruce, thanks very much as always.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.
Yeah, as always. So just is left to me to remind listeners that you can access the pod across all your favourite podcast platforms. Please rate and review if you're so inclined. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel for the video versions of the pod. Also make sure to follow Talking Horses Podcast, all one word, on Instagram for news about the podcast. Plenty else from the racing world, and indeed news on our weekend selections. And lastly, please do leave us your questions, or indeed comments on any of the stuff that we've raised today or in previous episodes, if you have something that you'd like us to tackle in future shows, or a rebuttal to some of the things that we might have covered
bring
today.
It on.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all about learning. We're all about continuous improvement.
That's it.
Enjoy the racing this weekend. Enjoy the Grand National on Saturday. And of course, gamble responsibly. And we'll see you all next week.
See you next week.